Hey everyone, and welcome back to Key Safety Talks. We're trying something new, kicking off a brand new format for you guys, daily podcasts, right here on our channel.
Daily. Wow.
Yep, we're diving deep into all things safety, bringing you those crucial insights and aha moments, those ones that can really help you build a safer workplace.
I like it.
Today's episode is, we're calling it Safety 101. Think of it as a crash course on, well, the fundamentals of safety.
A crash course, huh? I see what you did there.
Yeah, pun totally intended.
Oh, in this crash course, we're going all the way back to the roots of safety. Back to the beginning.
Back to the basics.
We'll be exploring how our understanding of accidents has, well, evolved over time.
Because safety, let's face it, safety isn't just about following rules, right?
No, not at all.
It's about understanding why those rules exist in the first place, right?
Exactly.
It's about developing that critical thinking mindset, that one that helps us anticipate and mitigate risks before they turn into, well, accidents.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
Before they turn into something we didn't want to happen.
It's about shifting from that reactive approach, where we're always playing catch up after something goes wrong.
Right.
To a more proactive approach where we're constantly looking ahead, kind of anticipating things.
And building safety into every aspect of our work.
Yeah. Into everything we do.
Weaving it into the fabric of the workplace.
Exactly.
So imagine you're about to head into that big meeting on safety improvements.
The one everyone's dreading.
Yeah. Or maybe you're just curious about how this whole field, how safety as a field even came to be.
Where it all started.
Yeah. This episode is your guide to navigating those foundational concepts.
Your roadmap.
And we promise to keep it engaging.
No dry textbook lectures here.
And we'll keep you entertained.
We'll be covering everything.
Everything.
From the basic definitions of, hazard, risk, incident, all that.
The ABCs.
To the evolution of, accident theories.
Accident theories like...
yeah, starting with some of the classics like Heinrich's domino theory.
Domino theory.
Yeah.
Is that like when I try to make breakfast and end up with a trail of flour, eggshells, and spilled coffee leading to the toaster?
Well, not exactly. But the analogy is actually pretty apt.
Okay.
Heinrich's domino theory, it basically suggests that accidents are the result of a chain of events, each one kind of triggering the next.
Chain reaction?
Yeah, just like dominoes falling one after another.
Okay.
It usually starts with some underlying factor, maybe something like inadequate training or a lack of management commitment to safety.
Like they're just not really prioritizing safety?
Right. It's not at the top of their minds.
Okay, so that's like the first domino teetering on the edge, ready to fall.
Exactly. And then that first domino sets off the whole chain reaction.
It all goes downhill from there.
You could say that.
Okay.
So it leads to, unsafe acts or conditions,
Yeah.
which then lead to the accident itself and ultimately, the injury or damage, that kind of thing.
The bad stuff.
Yeah, stuff we don't want to happen.
So the theory emphasizes that by removing even just one domino from that sequence, any domino from that sequence, you can break the chain and prevent the accident.
That's the key takeaway.
So it's like identifying those weak points in the chain and putting safeguards in place to prevent those dominoes from, toppling over.
Right.
But isn't this theory a bit outdated? Blaming workers for accidents seems, it just seems a bit, harsh.
Yeah, I can see how you think that.
We know that accidents are often the result of complex interactions
Very complex.
between people and systems and the environment.
It's not always that simple.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. While Heinrich's theory was, groundbreaking for its
It
time.
was revolutionary back then.
It really was. But, it does have its limitations.
Like everything's.
Yeah. One of the biggest criticisms is that it tends to focus on individual blame.
Placing blame on one person.
Right. Rather than looking at the bigger picture, kind of zooming out a little bit.
Yeah.
The whole context.
Exactly.
But-
It doesn't adequately account for those, those systemic factors that really do contribute to accidents.
Like, what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, things like poor design,
Right.
inadequate training, or a culture that tolerates shortcuts.
Like where it's okay to cut corners.
Yeah, where safety isn't really the top priority.
Right. That's a really important point. It's like saying, oh, the worker forgot to wear their safety glasses, so it's their fault.
Right.
But what if the safety glasses were, uncomfortable or fogged up easily?
What if they just weren't practical to wear?
What if the worker wasn't properly trained on how to use them?
Mm.
It's about looking beyond the individual action and understanding the context in which that action occurred.
Exactly. And that's actually where more modern theories and models come into play.
They take a wider lens to it.
They do. They really do. And they recognize that accidents are rarely, if ever, caused by a single factor.
It's multifactorial. It is. It's really complex. They acknowledge the complexity of accident causation
Right.
and the importance of addressing those systemic issues, those bigger picture things.
So if the domino theory is like a linear chain of events, what are some other ways to visualize how accidents happen? Like, are there other metaphors we can use?
Well, think of it as like a spider web.
Okay.
Where each strand, represents a contributing factor.
Okay, I can see that.
So you might have human error as one strand, equipment malfunction as another, inadequate training as another, and so on.
Right. And these strands are all connected.
They are. And, when enough of those strands come together, the web weakens and eventually it collapses.
And that's the accident.
That's when things go wrong.
That's a much more nuanced way of looking at it.
It's less about blame and more about understanding all the factors involved.
It's not about finding that one domino to remove. It's about strengthening the entire web.
Right.
Making it more resilient to those stresses and strains that can lead to accidents.
Exactly. And, this is where we start to see that shift. From focusing solely on individual behavior to understanding the role of systems and organizational culture in safety.
It's about that bigger picture again.
Yeah, it's about building a safety culture that's embedded in every level of the organization, from the CEO all the way down to the frontline worker.
It's got to be woven into the fabric of the workplace.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to get the big picture here, I think.
Good.
But let's back up for a second,
Yep,
okay?
sure.
And make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to, those key terms you mentioned earlier: hazard, risk, and incident.
Yeah, good point. Let's break those down, kind of define them a little bit.
Back to basics.
Back to basics. Let's start with hazard.
Hazard.
Think of a hazard as any condition or circumstance that has the potential to cause harm.
Right.
It's, anything that could lead to an accident or an incident.
So a hazard is like a potential danger, like it's lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce.
Yeah, I like that. Lurking in the shadows.
Can you give me like a real world example?
Absolutely. Imagine a construction site, okay,
Okay.
with a deep excavation.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The excavation itself is the hazard. It has the potential to cause serious injury or even death if someone falls in.
Oh, yeah, I see.
So that's a hazard.
Okay, that's a pretty clear example of a hazard.
Yeah.
But just having the excavation there, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean an accident will happen, right? It's about how people interact with that hazard.
Right. Exactly. And that brings us to risk.
Risk.
Risk is essentially the combination of the likelihood of an adverse event happening
Okay.
and the potential severity of its consequences, like how bad it could be.
So it considers both the chance of something going wrong and how bad the outcome could be.
Yeah, the probability and the impact.
A two-part equation.
Yeah.
Probability and impact.
Exactly.
Let's stick with our excavation example.
Okay.
What would increase the risk in that scenario?
Well, if the excavation isn't, properly barricaded,
Right.
or if workers aren't using, fall protection, the likelihood of someone falling in, well, that increases significantly.
Right.
And the impact of that fall could be, it could be devastating,
Right.
right? Resulting in, serious injuries or even fatality.
So to manage risk,
Yeah.
we need to either reduce the probability of the event happening, like you said, or minimize the potential impact if it does occur.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where those preventative strategies we'll talk about later, those come into play.
We'll get to those.
But before we get there, let's tackle that last term, incident.
Okay. Lay it on me. What's an incident?
An incident is, it's any unplanned event or sequence of events that may or may not have consequences,
So it might have consequences, it might not.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a broader term than accident. You could say that all accidents are incidents, but not all incidents are accidents.
Okay, I'm following you.
So an incident is kind of like a near miss.
Something that could have gone wrong but didn't.
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine a worker on a loading dock.
Okay.
Nearly backing a forklift off the edge, but hitting the brakes just in time.
Oh, close call.
Yeah, that's an incident. There was a potential for a serious accident, but thankfully nothing happened.
Ew, that was lucky.
It was, but it's still important to investigate incidents, even those close calls.
Why is that?
Because they can provide valuable insights into potential hazards
Right.
and weaknesses in our safety systems.
They're like a warning sign. Exactly. That's a great point. Incidents are like those little whispers telling us that something isn't quite right, you know?
Yeah.
If we ignore them, they might escalate into something much more serious down the line.
And we don't want that.
Definitely not.
And, those incidents, even the seemingly minor ones, those can help us identify trends and patterns that might not be apparent at first glance, you know?
Right, right.
They allow us to be more proactive in our safety efforts.
Thinking ahead.
Yeah, addressing those underlying issues before they lead to, to major accidents.
So we've covered hazards, risks, and incidents.
The basics.
Building blocks.
Mhm.
We've talked about the domino theory and its limitations.
Right.
And we've touched on the idea of a more holistic, systems-based approach to safety.
The bigger picture.
Yeah. But let's get down to brass tacks, all right?
Let's get practical.
How do we actually prevent accidents from happening in the first place? That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is, and thankfully, we have a whole arsenal of strategies and tools at our disposal.
Okay.
And one of the most widely used is the 3 E's of safety:
3 E's.
engineering, education, and enforcement.
The 3 E's. I've heard of this. It's like a safety superhero team, right?
Mhm.
Like the Avengers of safety.
I like that analogy, the safety Avengers. Let's start with engineering.
Okay, Mr. Engineering, what's your superpower?
Well, engineering is all about designing hazards out of the workplace.
Designing them out completely.
Ideally, yes.
Wow.
Creating systems and processes that are, that are inherently safer. Think of it as building safety into the very fabric of the workplace.
So it's about addressing those hazards at the source, not just relying on people to avoid them.
Exactly. A great example of this is machine guarding.
Machine guarding.
Yeah, by designing machines with those built-in safety features like guards and interlocks,
Right.
we can significantly reduce the risk of workers coming into contact with dangerous moving parts.
So those parts are shielded or inaccessible?
Yeah, they're designed to prevent access to those dangerous areas.
Okay, so it's like a physical barrier between the worker and the hazard.
Exactly.
That makes sense. What about another example?
Another example is ergonomic design.
Ergonomic design.
Mm-hmm. Which focuses on creating workstations and tools that, that minimize strain and fatigue on the worker.
Right, because fatigue can definitely lead to mistakes and accidents.
Absolutely. And ergonomic design helps reduce the risk of, those musculoskeletal injuries like back pain and carpal tunnel syndrome, things like that.
Okay, so engineering is about eliminating or minimizing hazards through design, through clever design.
Through smart design.
What about education? Does this mean sending everyone back to school for, like, a safety degree?
Not necessarily, although, more education is always a good thing.
Sure.
And in this context, education is really about, it's about equipping workers with the knowledge and skills they need to work safely, to do their jobs safely.
To be safe on the job.
Exactly.
But what does that look like in practice?
It includes, it includes everything from, that initial safety orientation that everyone goes through.
Right, when you first start a job.
Exactly. To ongoing training on specific tasks, hazards, and procedures.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's a continuous process.
Exactly. And it's about making sure workers, understand the risks associated with their jobs and that they have the tools and resources to mitigate those risks, to make those risks as small as possible.
So it's not just about telling people what to do, it's about empowering them to make informed decisions.
Right. Right.
And to take ownership of their safety and then the safety of those around them.
Absolutely. And a crucial part of this is creating a culture where workers, where they feel comfortable asking questions.
Yeah, where they don't feel afraid to speak up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And reporting hazards.
Right, if they see something that's not safe.
Mm-hmm. And even suggesting improvements,
If they have an idea for how to make things safer. Okay, so it's about fostering open communication and collaboration around safety, making it a team effort.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Okay, so we've got engineering to design out hazards and education to empower workers.
Right.
What's the third E all about?
The third E is enforcement. And this is, this is where we start talking about rules, regulations, and accountability.
The more serious stuff.
You could say that. It's about establishing clear expectations for safe behavior and making sure those expectations are, followed consistently.
So it's about setting those boundaries and having consequences when those boundaries are crossed.
Exactly. Think of it as the safety net that catches people when those other layers of protection fail.
The last line of defense.
You could say that. Enforcement can include, things like safety inspections, audits, disciplinary actions, and even legal penalties for those really serious violations.
The ones that put people at real risk.
It's about making sure that that safety is taken seriously and that, that there are consequences for putting people at risk.
But isn't enforcement a bit heavy-handed? I mean, can't we just rely on people to do the right thing?
Well, while we'd love to think that everyone will always prioritize safety,
Right.
The reality is that that human behavior can be unpredictable.
We're not perfect.
We're not, no, and, we get complacent, we take shortcuts, we make mistakes.
We're human.
Exactly. And enforcement helps to create that, that structure and accountability that really does keep safety top of mind.
Keeps it front and center.
Yeah, it makes it harder to forget about safety when, there are rules and consequences.
Okay, so the 3 E's, they kind of work together to create this multi-layered approach to safety. We're designing out hazards, empowering workers, and setting those clear boundaries with consequences. But isn't there a 4th E, something about encouragement?
You're right. There's a growing movement in safety to add that 4th E, to add encouragement to the mix.
I like that.
Because, while rules and consequences are important,
they're necessary, but
they are, but they're not always enough to create a truly safe work environment,
So it's about going beyond the stick and offering some carrots too.
Exactly.
Like positive reinforcement.
Encouragement focuses on it focuses on recognizing and rewarding safe behavior.
Okay.
Fostering a positive safety culture where people feel valued and
Definitely.
appreciated for their efforts, for their commitment to safety.
So it's about celebrating successes.
Yes.
Sharing best practices, and creating a sense of shared ownership around safety.
It's about making safety something that everyone's invested in, not just something that's imposed from above.
I love that. It's about shifting the focus from what people are doing wrong to what they're doing right. It's about creating a culture where safety isn't just a set of rules to follow. It's a value that everyone embraces.
Exactly. And research has shown that that positive reinforcement is far more effective than punishment when it comes to motivating people to change their behavior.
It's the carrot versus the stick.
Exactly. So by encouraging safe behavior, we're not just creating a more pleasant work environment.
Right.
We're also making it a safer one.
Okay, I'm convinced. 4 Ace it is.
Yeah.
But how do we know which of these strategies to prioritize in a given situation? It seems like it could get a bit overwhelming trying to decide which E to focus on.
That's where another essential tool comes into play, the hierarchy of controls.
A hierarchy of controls. Okay.
It's a system for prioritizing different types of controls based on their effectiveness in eliminating or minimizing hazards.
So it's like a ranking system.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, tell me more about this hierarchy. I'm all about finding those most effective solutions.
Well, the hierarchy of controls is often depicted as a pyramid, with the most effective controls at the top and the least effective at the bottom.
So we want to aim for the top of the pyramid.
Right. We want those higher level controls whenever possible.
Okay.
And at the very top of that pyramid is elimination.
Elimination, okay.
Which, as the name suggests, involves completely removing the hazard from the workplace.
So if we can get rid of the hazard entirely, that's the ideal scenario.
It is. It's the gold standard.
But what if that's not possible? Like in our excavation example, we can't just magically make the excavation disappear.
Right. Elimination isn't always feasible.
Okay.
So the next step down the hierarchy, the next best thing is substitution.
Substitution.
And this involves replacing a hazardous substance or process with a safer alternative.
Okay, so like swapping out something dangerous for something less dangerous.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, in our excavation example, could we substitute the hazard of falling into the excavation by using prefabricated components that can be assembled at ground level?
That's a great example of substitution.
So that way, workers wouldn't even need to be near the edge of the excavation.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to achieve the same outcome without exposing workers to the same level of risk.
I like it. So we eliminate if we can substitute. If we can't eliminate,
Right.
what's next on the list?
Next are engineering controls, which involve physically changing the workplace or equipment to reduce or eliminate the hazard.
Okay.
Think of things like machine guards,
So you're talking about those.
ventilation systems, safety interlocks, and even something as simple as good lighting.
Good lighting.
To improve visibility and to reduce the risk of trips and falls.
Oh, right, because if you can't see where you're going, you're more likely to trip over something or bump into something.
Exactly.
So these are the controls that are built into the design of the workplace itself.
Right, they're part of the physical environment.
Makes sense. But what if even those aren't enough to fully mitigate the risk?
Then we move to administrative controls, which rely on procedures, policies, training, and supervision to manage the hazard.
Okay, so this is more about the human element.
The organizational side of things.
What kind of things fall into this category?
This could include, things like work permits, job rotation.
Job rotation.
Yeah, to limit exposure to certain hazards.
Oh, right. So you're not exposed to the same hazard for too long.
Exactly. And, mandatory safety training and regular inspections to identify and correct those potential hazards.
So these are the controls that rely on, they rely on human behavior and organizational systems to manage the risk.
Exactly. They depend on people following the rules and procedures.
Got it. What's the last resort in this hierarchy?
The last line of defense and the least effective control is personal protective equipment, or PPE.
PPE. The trusty hard hats, safety glasses, and steel-toed boots.
Those are essential. But, PPE should always be considered a last resort.
Why is that?
Because it relies on the worker, consistently and correctly using the equipment. And it doesn't really address the hazard itself, It's just a barrier between the worker and the hazard.
That's a really important point. It's like putting a bandage on a problem instead of actually fixing it.
Exactly. You're not eliminating the hazard. You're just trying to minimize the damage if something goes wrong.
So this hierarchy, this pyramid, it gives us a clear roadmap for choosing the most effective controls for each situation.
It's a great tool for making those decisions.
And it's not just about choosing one control, right?
Yeah.
We often use a combination of controls at different levels of the hierarchy to create a layered approach to safety.
Exactly. Think of it as a multi-layered defense system.
Okay.
Where we're addressing risks at multiple points, to minimize the chance of something going wrong.
Like a safety net with multiple layers.
We want to catch those hazards before they can cause any harm.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, the 3 or 4. S of safety and the hierarchy of controls.
A lot of information to digest.
We're starting to see how these frameworks can help us translate theory into action.
They give us those practical tools.
Right, they bridge the gap between the ideas and the actual doing.
They help us put those concepts into practice. Welcome back, everyone. We're ready to dive into some real-world examples.
Yeah, let's see how those safety fundamentals we just talked about, how those actually play out in the real world.
All right, so let's start by revisiting that construction site excavation example, the one we talked about earlier.
The one with the big hole in the ground.
That's the one. Remember, we identified that excavation as a hazard, that potential for someone to fall in and get seriously injured.
Yeah, and we talked about how we can't just eliminate the hazard completely, right?
Yeah.
Because excavations, well, they're a necessary part of construction work. I mean, you got to dig sometimes.
You do. You can't always avoid them. So let's move down that hierarchy of controls, the pyramid we talked about,
Okay.
and see how we can, mitigate that risk, make it less dangerous.
All right.
We already mentioned the possibility of using prefabricated components, right? To reduce the amount of work that actually needs to be done at the edge of that excavation.
Right. So the workers wouldn't have to be right there on the edge, so close to the danger.
Exactly. Less exposure to the hazard, that's the goal. And that's substitution, right?
Yeah, swapping out a hazardous process for a safer one.
Exactly. Finding a different way to do things, a safer way.
Okay, but let's say, just for argument's sake, let's say that's not feasible for this particular project.
All right, we got to work with what we got.
What about those engineering controls? Those physical safeguards we can put in place to prevent those falls.
Yeah, good point. What kind of things can we build or install to make that excavation safer?
Well, first and foremost, that excavation should be properly barricaded, right?
Absolutely. You got to have those barriers.
With sturdy guardrails and tow boards,
Yeah.
to prevent workers from accidentally stepping or falling in?
Yeah, those physical barriers are crucial. And those guardrails, they should be designed and installed according to, to industry standards.
Of course, got to follow the rules.
Got to make sure they're up to code.
Right. We don't want those guardrails, collapsing if someone leans on them or becoming a tripping hazard because they're poorly placed. Right.
Excellent point. Safety features shouldn't create more hazards, right?
Exactly. And speaking of visibility, good lighting. That's got to be crucial on construction sites, especially around excavations.
Oh, yeah, you got to be able to see where you're going, especially at night or, if the weather's bad.
Right. When it's dark and rainy, it's even easier to trip and fall.
Absolutely. Visibility is key to preventing those kinds of accidents.
Okay, so we've got guardrails and lighting. What else can we do from an engineering perspective?
Well, depending on the depth of that excavation, they might also consider using safety nets.
Safety nets, like a big net to catch someone if they fall?
Exactly. Or even a slide rail system,
Mm.
which essentially creates like a protective barrier around the excavation as it's being dug.
Oh, wow. So it's like a shield that moves down with the excavation?
Yeah, kind of like that. It prevents the walls from collapsing in on the workers.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty serious engineering controls here.
Yeah, when it comes to excavations, you got to go all out with those safety measures.
But let's not forget about those other IS, right? Education and enforcement. How do those play into this scenario?
Oh, they're absolutely crucial. Education is all about making sure the workers understand the hazards, the risks involved.
Right, they need to know what they're dealing with.
They do, and they need to know how to work around those excavations safely, how to use fall protection equipment properly, all that good stuff.
And enforcement comes into play to make sure everyone's actually following those safety rules and procedures.
Yeah, you got to have that accountability.
So what does enforcement look like in this case?
Well, it could involve, regular inspections to make sure those guardrails are in good condition, safety audits to observe worker behavior, see if they're actually following the rules.
Right, making sure they're not taking any shortcuts.
Yes, and, disciplinary actions for those who violate safety protocols.
To have those consequences in place to really drive the point home.
Absolutely. Safety rules aren't just suggestions. They're there to protect people.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, addressing the risks from multiple angles.
That's the idea, a layered approach to safety, multiple lines of defense.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. But let's shift gears for a moment, okay? Let's talk about another industry where safety is, well, it's paramount.
All right, what industry are you thinking about?
Healthcare.
Oh, yeah, healthcare. That's a big one.
I imagine the hazards and the controls, they look quite different in that setting.
Absolutely. Healthcare presents its own unique set of challenges, that's for sure.
So let's consider a situation, one that we all hope to avoid, a surgical error.
Okay, I'm following you.
Imagine a scenario, where a surgeon accidentally leaves a surgical instrument inside a patient's body.
Oh, wow. That's every patient's worst nightmare, isn't it? That's a serious situation, that's for sure.
It is. So what are the hazards, the things that are contributing to this type of event?
Well, the obvious hazard is, it's the surgical instrument itself, right? I mean, if it's not removed, it can cause serious complications for the patient.
But again, it's not just about the instrument itself, right? It's about those human factors, the systems and the environment in which that surgery takes place.
You're absolutely right. There are so many factors that can contribute to a surgical error.
Like, fatigue, distractions, maybe even time pressure or inadequate staffing.
All of those things can play a role, absolutely.
So how can we apply, the hierarchy of controls to prevent this kind of error from happening?
That's a good question. Let's think about it. Elimination. Well, elimination is usually not an option, right? Because you need those surgical instruments to perform the surgery.
Right, you can't exactly do surgery without tools.
So what about substitution? Is there a way to substitute a potentially dangerous instrument with a safer alternative?
Like, I don't know, a different type of instrument that's less likely to be left behind.
Yeah, something like that. In some cases, yes, you can do that. For example, some procedures can be performed laparoscopically.
Laparoscopically?
Using smaller incisions and specialized instruments, which can reduce the risk of complications.
Oh, so it's less invasive, less cutting involved.
Exactly.
So less invasive procedures can sometimes equate to safer procedures.
Yeah, in many cases, less is more when it comes to surgery.
Okay, what about What about engineering controls? Are there ways to design the surgical environment um, or the instruments themselves to minimize the risk of those retained objects?
Well, I've heard of surgical sponges with those embedded radio frequency tags.
Radio frequency tags, what are those?
They're basically tiny little chips that emit a signal that can be detected by a scanner.
So after the surgery, they can scan the patient to make sure there are no sponges left behind.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
It's a great way to prevent retained objects, and those tagged sponges are becoming, increasingly common.
Technology to the rescue.
Technology can definitely play a role in improving safety.
What about what about using like standardized instrument trays?
Standardized instrument trays.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
trays with a specific number of instruments that are, that are counted before and after the surgery.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. So you have a set number of instruments on the tray, and you make sure they're all accounted for at the beginning and end of the procedure.
Exactly. That way there's no question about whether anything's missing.
That's a great idea. It takes the guesswork out of it and it creates a clear system for cracking those instruments.
Okay, so we've got those tag sponges, standardized instrument trays. What about administrative controls? What kind of procedures and training can help prevent retained objects?
Well, they could implement a surgical safety checklist.
A checklist, like a to-do list for the surgery.
Kind of like that, yeah. And that checklist would include a specific step for counting instruments, before and after the procedure.
So it's not just a mental note, it's actually written down and checked off.
Exactly. And that checklist, it should be reviewed out loud by the entire surgical team.
The whole team's involved.
Yeah, everyone's got to be on the same page.
Right, with everyone confirming the count, so there's that shared responsibility.
Right. It reduces the reliance on just one person to catch those errors. Everyone's looking out for each other.
And of course, clear communication among the surgical team, that's got to be essential.
Oh, yeah. Communication is key in any high-stakes environment, especially in surgery.
Right. Everyone needs to feel comfortable, comfortable speaking up if they see something that seems amiss.
Absolutely. Surgeries are, they're high-pressure environments, but you got to create a culture where speaking up is not just allowed, it's encouraged.
Where it's expected.
Yeah, if you see something, say something, That's got to be the mentality.
Okay, so we've got those checklists, clear communication, and a culture that supports speaking up.
Right.
What about PPE in this scenario?
Well, PPE isn't really relevant to preventing those retained objects, those instruments or sponges being left behind.
Right, because it's not about protecting the worker from the hazard, it's about preventing the hazard from happening in the first place.
Exactly. PPE is more about protecting the surgical team from other hazards, things like bloodborne pathogens.
Right, those infectious diseases that can be spread through blood and bodily fluids.
So PPE definitely has its place, but it's not the solution to every safety challenge.
It's just one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And this highlights the importance of understanding those specific hazards in each situation.
Right, different hazards call for different controls.
And applying that hierarchy of controls strategically, to choose the most effective preventative measures.
So we're not just throwing random solutions at the problem, we're actually thinking it through.
We're being smart about it using those tools and frameworks we talked about earlier.
Okay, so we've covered construction and healthcare. Can we squeeze in one more industry before we wrap up this segment?
Sure, let's do it. What industry are you thinking about?
How about manufacturing? It's a sector known for its use of heavy machinery and potentially hazardous processes.
Oh, yeah. Manufacturing, lots of potential for danger there.
Lots of moving parts, lots of heavy stuff.
Definitely an industry where safety is critical.
Okay, let's say we're talking about a worker. A worker operating a large metal stamping press. Those machines that press metal sheets into different shapes.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those in action. Those things look pretty intimidating.
They are. The obvious hazard here is, it's the crushing force of the press, right?
Yeah, if a worker's hand or arm gets caught in that press, the consequences could be devastating.
So how do we apply our safety fundamentals to keep those workers safe? Starting with elimination.
Okay, elimination, let's see.
Can we eliminate the hazard of the press itself? Like, can we get rid of it completely?
Well, elimination might not be realistic if that press is essential to the manufacturing process.
Right. If they need that press to make their product, they can't just get rid of it.
So what about substitution? Can we substitute that that hazardous stamping process with a safer alternative.
Like, I don't know, a different way to shape the metal that doesn't involve a giant press.
Yeah, or maybe a different type of press that's inherently safer.
Okay, so substitution's possibility. What about those engineering controls? What can we do to make the press itself safer?
Well, I've seen presses with those light curtains.
Light curtains, what are those?
Yeah. They're basically beams of light that create a safety barrier around the press.
Okay.
And if a worker breaks that beam, it automatically stops the press.
Oh, wow. So it's like a tripwire made of light.
Yeah, you could say that. It prevents the press from operating if anything enters that hazardous zone.
So it's like an invisible shield.
Exact.
That's a great example of an engineering control, using technology to make the machine itself safer.
Yeah, those light curtains, they're pretty effective at preventing those hand and arm injuries.
What about those physical guards or barriers around the press? To prevent workers from accessing those danger zones.
Oh, yeah, those are essential too.
Yeah.
You got to have those physical barriers in place.
And they should be, interlocked with the press controls so that so the press can't operate unless those guards are in place.
That's a good point. You don't want someone bypassing those safety features.
Right. You want to make sure those guards are doing their job.
Exactly. Safety features are only effective if they're used properly.
Okay, so we've got light curtains, guards, and interlocks. What about the human element? How do education and enforcement come into play here?
Well, worker training it's absolutely crucial. Workers need to understand how that press operates, how to safely load and unload those materials.
Right, they need to know the proper procedures.
And they need to know how to recognize and respond to potential malfunctions.
What to do if something goes wrong.
Exactly. And of course, they need to be trained on the importance of using those safety features we just discussed, those light curtains, guards, and interlocks.
Right, because even the most sophisticated engineering controls, they won't prevent accidents if workers aren't using them properly.
Exactly. And that's where enforcement comes in, right?
Yeah, making sure people are following the rules.
Regular inspections they can ensure that those safety features are actually functioning properly.
Right.
And supervisors can observe worker behavior, to make sure they're actually following those safety protocols.
So we're back to that multi-layered approach.
Combining those engineering controls, education, and enforcement to create that safe system.
And let's not forget about encouragement, recognizing and rewarding those workers who consistently follow those safety procedures can go a long way in creating a positive safety culture.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's about celebrating those who are doing things right and making safety a source of pride within the organization.
Yeah, making safety something that people are proud of, not just something they have to do.
Exactly. We want to create a culture where safety is everyone's priority, not just a burden.
Well, it looks like we've covered a lot of ground in this segment.
We have. From construction to healthcare to manufacturing, we've seen how those safety principles can be applied in such diverse settings.
Yeah, and we've seen how that hierarchy of controls, that pyramid, it provides a framework for choosing the most effective strategies for preventing those accidents.
It helps us make those tough decisions about how to allocate resources and prioritize our safety efforts.
I'm feeling, I'm feeling pretty empowered right now. Like I have a whole new set of tools to tackle those safety challenges.
That's great to hear. That's what we want. We want people to feel equipped to make a difference.
But before we wrap up completely, we've got one more segment to go.
One more segment to tie it all together.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What else do we have in store for our listeners?
We're going to take a closer look at the concept of safety management systems, those comprehensive frameworks that help organizations manage those safety risks across all levels of the operation.
So we're talking about, like, a system of systems.
Yeah, a holistic approach to safety that encompasses everything we've talked about today.
Sounds like a fitting way to tie everything together.
I think so, too. So stick around, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
Welcome back to Key Safety Talks, everyone. We've explored so much in this episode, from those basic safety concepts to those pretty intense real-world examples.
We've talked about everything from excavations to surgeries and even those giant metal stamping presses.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And now we're going to zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture.
The big picture, okay.
We've mentioned safety management systems a few times throughout this episode.
We have. They've kind of been lurking in the background.
They have, but I think it's, it's time to give them the attention they deserve.
All right, let's dive into those safety management systems, or, SMS for short.
SMS.
Yeah, so those safety management systems, they're kind of like the glue that holds all those individual safety efforts together,
So it's more than just a collection of, rules and procedures.
It is. It's a framework for managing safety risks across an entire organization.
So instead of just focusing on, specific hazards or tasks, it's about taking a more holistic approach to safety, right?
Exactly. A robust SMS, a really good one, helps organizations identify and manage risks proactively.
Thinking ahead, anticipating those problems before they happen.
And it helps create a strong safety culture, where everyone's on board with safety.
Right, where safety is everyone's responsibility, not just the safety department's job.
And it helps organizations continuously improve their safety performance, always getting better, always striving for that next level of safety.
Okay, so it sounds, it sounds incredibly comprehensive, but also a bit daunting, to be honest.
I can see that.
Where do you even begin to build something like that? It seems like a huge undertaking.
It can feel overwhelming, you're right, but like any large project, it's best to break it down into those manageable steps.
Okay, break it down, make it bite-sized.
And one of the first things you need is a clear commitment from leadership, from the top.
Right, because safety isn't just the responsibility of the safety department. It needs to be a core value, one that's embraced by everyone in the organization, from the CEO all the way down to, the frontline workers.
Absolutely. Without that buy-in from leadership, those safety efforts, they're likely to fizzle out.
They lose momentum.
Yeah, they need that support from the top to really take root and flourish.
So leadership needs to, they need to set the tone, right?
Yeah, they got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
They need to provide the resources.
The money, the time, the training, all of that.
And they need to, they need to hold everyone accountable for safety performance.
Yeah, make it clear that safety is a priority and that everyone's expected to contribute.
Okay, so we've got leadership on board. What's next on our SMS to-do list?
Next, you need to establish a clear safety policy, one that outlines the organization's commitment to safety.
Okay, like a mission statement for safety.
Yeah, something like that. It should outline, the organization's goals for safety, the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved, all of that.
So it's like a safety constitution. The foundational document that guides all those other efforts.
I like that analogy. The safety constitution, I like it. And once you have that policy in place, you can start developing those specific procedures and processes for managing those different types of hazards.
Right, like those checklists, training programs, inspection protocols we talked about earlier. Those all fit under that SMS umbrella, right?
Exactly. They're all part of that comprehensive system.
And a key element of any effective SMS is a system for reporting and investigating incidents, those near misses we talked about earlier.
Right, because even if nothing bad happened, those incidents can be incredibly valuable learning opportunities.
They're like those warning signs, those little whispers that something's not quite right.
Exactly. By analyzing those close calls, we can identify patterns and trends, uncover weaknesses in our systems, and implement corrective actions to prevent those incidents from escalating into major accidents.
So it's about turning those near misses into opportunities for continuous improvement.
Exactly. Always learning, always getting better.
And speaking of continuous improvement, a strong SMS also includes a process for regularly reviewing and updating the system itself, right? Because safety, it's not a static concept.
It's always evolving.
New hazards emerge, regulations change, technology advances. We need to be, constantly adapting and evolving to keep pace.
We got to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so we've got that leadership commitment, a clear safety policy, procedures for managing those hazards, a system for reporting and investigating incidents, and a commitment to continuous improvement. Anything else? Anything we're missing?
Well, one crucial element we haven't really touched on yet is communication,
Communication.
Okay. A robust SMS, It includes multiple channels for communicating safety information, from those regular safety meetings to newsletters, bulletin boards, and even online platforms.
Right. Because safety isn't just about having those policies and procedures in place. It's about making sure everyone understands them, embraces them and incorporates them into their daily work.
Exactly. Communication is key to creating a culture of safety where everyone feels, informed, empowered, and engaged in those safety efforts.
Okay, I think I'm starting to grasp the scope of what a safety management system really entails.
It's a big undertaking, but it's worth it.
It's not just a few documents and checklists. It's a comprehensive framework that touches every aspect of the organization.
It's about weaving safety into the very fabric of the workplace, making it an integral part of everything you do.
But let's be realistic here. Building a robust SMS, it takes time, effort, and resources.
It does, it's an investment, but the payoff is huge.
So what's the payoff? Why should organizations invest in this level of effort? What's the benefit?
Well, the benefits are, they're substantial. A well-designed and implemented SMS, it can lead to a significant reduction in those accidents and injuries.
That's the ultimate goal, right?
It is, and that translates into, lower costs, improved productivity, and a more positive work environment.
Okay, less pain and suffering, more efficiency, and a happier workforce. I like the sound of that.
It's a win-win for everyone involved.
And it helps organizations improve their compliance with those legal and regulatory requirements, right?
Absolutely. It reduces the risk of those fines, penalties, and even legal action.
So it's not just about doing the right thing ethically. It's also about protecting the organization from a financial and legal standpoint.
Exactly. And let's not forget about those reputational benefits. A company with a strong safety record, they're more attractive to customers.
Right. People want to do business with companies that prioritize safety.
And investors and potential employees. Everyone wants to be associated with a company that values safety.
So it's it's a win-win situation, a strong safety culture. It benefits everyone. The workers, the organization, and even society as a whole.
Exactly. We all benefit when workplaces are safe.
And that brings us back to one of our key themes for this episode. That shift from a reactive to a proactive approach to safety.
Being proactive, anticipating those risks, not just reacting to them after something's gone wrong.
And safety management systems, they're all about being proactive, anticipating those risks and implementing those multi-layered controls to prevent accidents before they happen.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of prevention where safety is embedded in everything we do.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From those fundamental concepts of safety to the complexities of building a world-class safety management system.
We've explored a lot of information, but hopefully it's been insightful and engaging.
I know I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have too. And remember, safety isn't just a job for those safety professionals. It's everyone's responsibility.
We have a role to play.
We all have a role to play in creating that culture of safety where everyone goes home safe and healthy at the end of the day.
That's what it's all about.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this safety journey.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time on Key Safety Talks.